Good afternoon, everyone. Quickly, so you know a little bit about Thoughtworks. We are a global software consultancy. We've been around for over 25 years now, and we are in 17 countries, about 48 different offices across that. And there's 8,000 thought workers across the globe. And we're a technology consultancy. So we've really helped our clients to solve complex business problems where technology is a differentiator. I'm just going to welcome our speakers. We've got Varsha George and Dave Ellerman, and they're going to be handing over for me in just a second. Varsha is our lead business analyst and has over 15 years experience leading delivery teams in lean and agile practices, supporting clients on their digital transformation journeys. And Dave Ellerman, you can see on the screen, is our global head of technology. He's deeply immersed in technology and its impact on business and society. And he's more than 35 years of technical experience across various industries. Dave advises board C-suites and executive committees and sits on technology advisory groups for government, independent companies, as well as standards bodies. And actually, I just spoken to Dave earlier, and he's reminded me that he's also a member of the World Economic Forum Council. So I think I will now hand over to yourself, Dave. You're going to hand over for me? Super.
Thanks very much, and that's perfect timing as my dogs welcome the herald the webinar. So thank you.
Heard your name, I think.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So we'd like to spend some time today introducing the Thoughtworks Looking Glass, which is a report that we are now going to produce annually, produced for the first time at the end of last year. And it's quite unique in the way that it's put together. We ask every thought worker on an annual basis what they think the future trends are. We then work those into, massage them into sort of common themes, and that gives us 120. Originally, it was 168, and now we've got 120 sort of underlying trends. And we've been doing this for our own internal technology strategy since 2013, and we've revised it every year, and we put these sort of big groupings together, which we call lenses. So each lens has the underlying trends within it, and the trends themselves can live or be relevant to multiple lenses. So the things that we're going to look at today, particularly, I'll quickly run through them all, but humanity augmented, this is AI really by any other name, AI and machine learning, and how AI specifically can augment our lives and assist us. Accelerating towards sustainability, we're going to look at that today too. That's the increasing pressure from climate change and renewables. Evolving interactions, which is how we interact with our devices, whether it's something that senses from our skin, whether it's a sensor within a factory, whether it's voice controlled, whether it's haptics and gestures, and the morphing of the compute fabric. Years ago, we had computers on our desks, and then we had them in a server room, and we had both. And then the server room grew and became a data center, and then somebody else owned the data center, and we called it the cloud. But now we're finding that different pieces of execution need to happen in different places. So we have the edge and we have fog and all these other terms, which is just simply about where your data lives or distributed and how the actual computation occurs, whether it's within you, your phone, your computer, on a device in your home that then aggregates information and sends it back to the cloud or whatever. Co-opetition forces platforms into ecosystems. This is the cloud platform economics and marketplaces that have occurred, digitized supply chain. And then, of course, something that I often talk about is the expanding impact of hostile tech. This is cybersecurity, cybercrime, and the sort of cat and mouse game of more intelligent attackers and more intelligent defenses. Okay, so next slide, please. So this slide, it shows the sort of the three horizons and the way that we look at this. So you can see that we give advice to clients in terms of how they should prioritize. So whether you should adopt analyze, or anticipate. That's your sense of priority around this. And then the individual trends, which you can see on the left, are then sort of time ordered. We're seeing them now, we're beginning to be seen, and we're on the horizon. And that can be specific to the sector that you're in, or even the company, the industry that you're in. So today we'd like to sort of focus a little bit on the sort of the interactions between the lenses, and how they can actually service you, and how you can think about these things within the realm of AI and sustainability, and how these things all work in concert together. So with that, I'd like to just hand over to Varsha to take us into the bulk of our content.
Thanks, Dave. I think the question we're going to start off with is, what do we think is going to disrupt the public sector, right? We can all agree that the pace with which technology is changing and driving many innovations across the globe and in all sectors. So today in this session, we're going to be focusing on examples where technology and agility are being used effectively, but also why the focus should shift to the growing priorities such as climate change, which would be a much bigger disruptor to both society and speed of legislation in the years to come. It's a fact and no longer a debate. I think everyone knows it. Climate change is a reality. And with a fast closing window of opportunity, a rapid response is the need of the hour. So what does that mean for the public sector? UK now have a legally binding net zero by 2050 target, a commitment to build back greener after the COVID-19 pandemic, and our host of the COP26 climate conference later this year. That means the government has to get its house in order and lead by example. Businesses will be at the heart of the delivery of net zero, yet how can policymaking speed up and adapt as science and guidance changes every year? We're really looking at dramatic shifts in behavior. We're all witness to how the pandemic forced change in public services, and not just public services, all sectors across, in the way we collaborate and communicate. We use tech as an enabler to work and move to remote working in no time. So we can also expect similar kind of behaviors to be driven by climate changes. There is new legislation changes coming along the way. That's the post-Brexit GDPR, accessibility, which will all have a huge impact, needing organizations to adapt in a fast pace. This, fueled by an era of the fourth industrial revolution, changes are bound to happen. Dave, what's your take on the fourth industrial revolution?
Well, it's a term that we often hear, isn't it? We associate it with the exponential pace of change, emerging technologies, and how best to use them. But in some senses, it's almost become a slightly pejorative term that tends to be associated with future thinkers that don't always have their I guess, realities rooted in the pragmatism of the present, and dealing with the legacy and the challenges that we see certainly in large corporations and enterprise, and also public sector. It's something that we see all the time, and we're involved in public sector work in multiple countries. And I think for us, there's four forces of change. There's the technology itself. New technology brings opportunity. And that's something that you would expect a technology company to say. And that's certainly what we see technology companies that are at the forefront, that are at the forefront of the internet, for example. We see them, enacting every day. But then there's the actual, the macro events that occur and how they actually force responses. We've just seen that with the pandemic. I mean, my goodness, it's happened and we had to react. People had to change their working behaviors like relatively overnight. But it's forced a focus on the individual. How do people actually respond to their expectations from digital systems and how they're expected to work? And also the biggest thing that we have coming up, as Varsha mentioned, is climate change. And to an extent, the focus on climate change has been somewhat masked by COVID, because it's there's been good and proper attention on the current crisis, but it is just around the corner, and the sad fact is that it's actually here. We're actually already seeing and suffering some of the downsides of climate change, and the problem is that rather than this being something that's it's a terrible situation that we hope everybody gets their heads around, and we hope the policymakers do something that's going to help everybody, the policymaking isn't happening quick enough. So governments aren't responding with their legislative processes quick enough, and this therefore means that how do we as technologists, and when you're in your weekly planning meeting and you're looking at trying to optimize your budget, how is that relevant to you? And the truth is that it's recognized across governments worldwide that governments don't act quick enough, and therefore their civil service isn't responsive enough, quickly enough. There's even been a UN General Resolution 72/242, in fact, which talks about policymaking and societal unreadiness for climate change. This is real. So we need to start to put people's needs first. Our systems need to model people's needs, not just the process and hitting the budgetary targets, knowing how we're going to be squeezed. That's the daily reality. We all face that. We see it. We feel the pain that you're actually in as policymakers for IT within government. But we're seeing more expectation external from enterprise, that consumers expect so much more, especially millennials. They shop with their conscience, and we're expecting policymaking to have to respond to in like fashion. So, similarly, the World Economic Forum, my colleagues released a report just recently that talked about understanding and acceptance of shared human values, that it's critical with the world facing challenges accelerated by the increasing complexity and interconnectedness and the dignity and equity of human beings. Now, that sounds like lofty and again, completely separated from day-to-day practices, but people's expectations is changing, and people, their use of digital public services, their buying power to consumers, everything is changing, and there is going to be more pressure and more expectation on consumer, on government and government departments to respond. So, secondly, just to double down on the climate change aspect a little bit, there has been broad agreement that something is bound to happen, but we're not ready for the pace of change. And what are we seeing? What are we actually seeing out there? The people that are responsible for looking after and stewarding the decision making and the governments is in the democratic world is our elected governments. Who is actually out there making the changes? It isn't governments. You look at the tech billionaires, and they are the people going to space. They are the people making claims about extracting carbon from the atmosphere, carbon vacuuming. They're the people that are doing the energy storage and battery innovation. Now, whilst this is all incredibly interesting, I mean, I'm, as a technologist, I love reading about it, but it worries me that this is not in the hands of a democratically elected government. So, how are we going to begin to start to wrestle that kind of that process back? So in thinking about doing that, we're going to run a poll. So get your poll ready. So just, how do you think that is your organization actively thinking about climate change and its impact on public services?
We're just going to give a couple of seconds for the people to vote on it. That's great. So I think it is unanimous. It is mixed at the moment, but there is agreement that we're all thinking about it. It is in the news, it is everywhere. We're aware that government is doing consultations, but we need to move to action mode now if we need to stand a chance to meet that goal. This has also been emphasized in the G7 summit earlier, where Boris Johnson did mention that action needs to start with us. But the question thus remains, is there a clear roadmap in place to achieve net zero by 2050? And Dave, how do you think the other countries are going about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see that the UK is making sort of certainly efforts in trying to at least, I'm mixed at the moment whether it's lip service, or for any countries whether it's lip service or real action. And you can see from this map, which quite frankly I find a bit depressing. You can see all of the global north countries are critically insufficient, and this is a current map. And a number of countries such as China, large, incredibly fast-paced growing economies, highly insufficient. So a country there that hasn't got, it's certainly got a legacy process, but it doesn't have the same legacy technology. That's why a lot of their tech industry's grown so fast, is because they haven't had the legacy problem that slows the West down. They don't have that replacement problem, whatever that means, and it can mean many different things. But look, highly insufficient, and there's something there about policy. And with the rest of the world, it's just incredibly sad to say. And who's the ones that are in green? Morocco and Gambia. It's sad. So, Varsha, to your point earlier, it seems the longer we wait as a society, as a set of planners and managers and policymakers, the more we're going to have to do later, because this isn't going away. This is coming slow. This is coming quickly towards us, and the time to react and to be responsive in terms of technology, and to use technologies like AI and automation to help us. Sustainability is coming at us, which is why we called it accelerating towards sustainability. And we've got technologies such as AI that are going to help us, but that window of opportunity is getting smaller.
Yeah. And yeah, that is really the point, Dave. The reality is the speed at which policy making trickles to the government is really slow. But once the policy is in place, the onus of making it happen and the speed of response would all trickle down to each one of you. We did see in the news that the NHS Trust and the ICS will have until April to develop carbon net neutral plans. And it's better to be prepared starting now. And I guess that's where we come in to ask the question, how ready is your organization to adapt? And thereby, where does technology fit in this?
Yeah, I mean, that's the technology. We find ourselves, I think, more and more in hope that technology will solve a lot of our problems. And we see examples of that, and it's not unreasonable for us to try and embrace new ideas and expect them to have a big impact. But we have to be in a position where we can actually utilize that technology. Sometimes that's about capability. It's quite simply, we have to learn about the technology. We have to learn how to let go of old ways of doing things. But there is the process of change, the mindset of change, and quick change is something that we need to adopt, very fast. As I've said before, the anticipation of citizens and consumers has changed. And it's something that when we're stuck in our ways, and we've all been there, we can actually be defensive and prevent change. We become the problem. So we, being the people that are holding on to old ways of working, we, the people that are holding on to a technology that we think is just going to be enough if we just put this last bit of effort into it. And we just don't want to hear people talking about sunk cost, problems. And sometimes things can be changed, And quite frankly, sometimes they need to be ripped up and thrown away. And this is where we're going to need new technologies to actually help us to accelerate. So, you know, rather than a box ticking or compliance issue, issues like sustainability should be understood as a contributor to business goals. We need to be able to measure them in terms of our business goals, or indeed our societal or our policy-making support goals. There are technologies that are around that are helping us, and it's really a question of finding the best way to fit them in. Automation, best use of machine learning, understanding where your data is right now and today, some basic work that could reap benefits in terms of the best use of data and becoming data driven. And then the more esoteric stuff that we mentioned earlier about extracting carbon from the environment, all that stuff, you know, some of the work that's happening in agriculture using drones and intelligent routing in Australia and America, you know, sounds great, looks great on a documentary, but has saved incredible amounts of money. And, you know, very often within government departments, that's all the only levers we get is how much money can we save? How do we show value, where a value is just money saving because our budget's been cut? I was reminded yesterday, I was doing some work with some corporate boards, and there's an expression that comes from a book, I believe. I've not read it, but the expression has an older origin. So the fish rots from the head. And, you know, where we look at this, in this case, as policy making as the head, you know, the decision making process, you know, a new world has to grow from the roots. And the changes are only going to come if people make those changes within the grassroots and force that change upwards. And we're going to need to be the people all over that make that change. So, you know, I think as you know, as Varsha pointed out, that technology is a key enabler to achieve the outcomes that we set out. But we've got another poll coming your way. And the next question is, are we investing enough in technology?
Just going to give another couple of seconds.
And bear in mind on your definition of enough.
Okay, so what do we have here? So a lot. Are there any surprises? Probably not. I think one of the key things is everyone is focused and understands that the amount of money that is being invested in technology is probably not enough. We need to pump in more. Next slide, please. I think, and this slide kind of indicates how IT spend in central government has increased year on year. From 2016, as you can see, that central government IT spend peaked in Q2 of 2020, where it grew by 5%. And that being said, there is a lot of money going into it. And the SR20 highlights the spend in digital and technology space, where there's over 600 million to support the modernization of technology across health and care system, 9.6 million provided to a number of departments to carry out a pilot designed to improve the cross-department evidence base and use of data. All this we see is money being spent in digital and technology initiatives. But is it really achieving the needs of the people which it will service? And are we getting the best value? It's probably easier than said. And I think one such example, having worked on it, is the government Verify program. The biggest lesson we learned from the Verify program is an example where an over-ambitious project was launched, but not with the support from adopters, which meant that although it ticked all boxes from a digital perspective, it was not adopted by other departments and leveraged to its full potential. When we came in, what was the need? The need was, let's build a simple digital identity solution that works for everyone. And that need still exists. in Government Digital Strategy 2021 to 2024, released last month, that need is their biggest mission, right? Which then says we pumped in all that money into a program, but what we realized is we missed the opportunity to collaborate with all departments, which ended up making a product which was not fit for purpose. So what do we do about that? So where is it going wrong? Is it cross-department collaboration? Is it the culture, the mindset, the way we're working through it? What could it be that is going wrong? So based on that, there are a couple of things that we looked at. It could be funding. I think everyone's talking about funding and the way the money is not sufficient enough. We're looking at digital skills shortage here. It could be digital skills shortage. It could be new policy implementation, prioritize over improving the foundations. The key is governments are being asked to do more, to do it better with the same amount of money. Boundaries within departments are going to be pushed, or the organization landscape of the public sector will need to be reimagined. Conventional ways of working, characterized by large silo departments, are being challenged and will need to be evolved. And now, having worked in a couple of projects in the public sector, there have been many things that we've noticed around large programs of work coming to a pause. And that's reality. It's not something that we'd like to make it go into a pause, but this is happening on the ground. So then the question as thought workers is, we put in so much effort into those projects. The question would be from the citizens as well, because that's the money that's being invested into all of these programs of work. So we really need to come out with an opportunity to kind of look at large transformation at scale. We're looking at opportunities to transform at scale. We're looking at how we need to put outcomes first before inputs. We're looking at all of these opportunities and how has Thoughtworks approached it. And that's where Dave's going to come in and show you some examples and talk you through that.
Thanks, Varsha. I think the truth is that, any company needs to have some sort of mission, and these are throwaway terms very often. Let's do the best possible thing in the bestest possible way, and they become just vacuous platitudes. But with the approach of climate change and the realities, we actually do need a statement that says, this is how we're going to get on board. And we've noticed a significant uptick in the number of clients globally that are coming to us for help. So that tells us, again, we're here talking about a report that is a reflection on what we see across the world. And we are seeing a number of people and governments, in this case, Australia, North America, here, and Singapore, that have all come to us and said, this is something we're going to have to do, not just to to provide some sort of IT support for some new system that's climate change relevant, but it needs to be done quickly and needs to get out there as fast as we possibly can. So, we've joined the Green Software Foundation. We're really proud of that, and we're going to try and work really hard at that. We've joined other companies such as Microsoft alongside them to try and keep this topic at the top table of everybody's sort of planning exercises over the next few years. But we've found ourselves able to do this simply because we have realized ourselves as a group of individuals within the company that are passionate enough to we need to be doing something about this, and people are responding to us and coming to us for some help for some of the things that we've done. We've created our own climate carbon footprint tracker that's freely available for people to sort of utilize in their planning, certainly in terms of their staff traveling and so on. So we recommend that you have a look at that and go forward. But just to sort of finish up, Could you take us to the next slide? This is an example of what good could look like. Now, if I hadn't have seen this, I wouldn't have known this was Estonia. And I know that Estonia is often cited as a sort of an interesting example of a government in terms of a digital sort of support system and so on. And yes, it's different from a country like the UK because of its size and because of its legacy and its footprint and some of the sort of governing and decision making and even the laws with respect to sort of privacy and human rights. However, the point, apart from the fact that some of the tech underneath it is pretty interesting, the point that's interesting about this is about 15 years ago when they kicked this thing off, they were coming out of the Soviet Union and its support system, and they had legacy process in spades, and they also had legacy technology and so on and so forth. So they had that set of context, and they had to change, and boy, did they have to change quick. Now, we're 15 years on, which is a good chunk of time, but they have implemented a world-leading digital support system. Yes, there's only 1.3 million people there. It's more of the sort of reflection of a sort of a city in, relatively small city in the UK. But there's some interesting ideas there. And the key point is they followed some really simple principles. And those principles were around digital identity, which even though there are sort of human rights questions in this country about privacy and so forth, we are going to have some sort of answer to the digital passport question. They would only store information in one place. This idea that once is enough, which is actually a much wider EU initiative. You only store the data in one place and you have to go and get it from that one place. It's never duplicated, it's never replicated. So systems remain incredibly simple. Now, my point here is that they had their driving needs and very real scenario that they needed to sort themselves out, and they did. Now, I'm not suggesting that we all go and use this technology or this approach, but we do need a set of very simple principles that you keep dogmatically to actually drive change forward, because we haven't got time to waste. So, in a sense, really, that's the message that we want to sort of build up to leading you to with. Keep things simple and keep things, and keep doggedly to them. Varsha.
I think we'd like to conclude by saying it's time to take action, right? A lot of talk has happened, but now it's really time to go back in there and figure out what is that action for your organization that you need to lead. And as David Attenborough rightly said, we have the skills to address it in time. All we need is a global will to do so. Accelerating towards sustainability is going to be a huge focus. We need to look at ways we can leverage technology which scales and can adapt to the changing priorities, but always with a mindset to keep people at the heart of everything. The demand for data and digital services will only continue to grow, but it shouldn't be at the cost of the planet. Thank you all for listening, and I would like to open up the floor for any questions that you may have.
Got plenty. The first one was an easy one, so I'll take that, and that's just all we'll be sharing the slides. And of course, we'll have a recording of this presentation to share with you. And the next question was, what's the impact of current data storage systems contributing to the issue of carbonisation?
Well, I mean, that's not a question I can answer in a short amount of time. I mean, there's an awful lot of research going into the data centers that hold the data storage systems and trying to operate them either as dark data centers, which means they're not occupied by people, there's no lights, they're in cold environments, so there's no heating costs. Cold means up near the Arctic Circle, ruining an environment. So to every you give with one hand, you take with the other. Nothing simple. Removing spinning disk, which is still very present in many data centers, and the power and energy that's taken to do that versus solid state drives. I think it's about being able to measure and be transparent about how and where the energy is utilized by the systems, such that they can be prioritized and changed effectively. I think it's just as simple as that. the problem is widespread, and I haven't actually seen anything that has any sort of global calculation on data storage in terms of the mechanics and its energy costs, but I've certainly seen it in benchmarks for certain, but not as a sort of a total. But that would be interesting to look into.
Thank you. Yeah, it's hard one to put you on the spot there, but have to answer the questions that come through. And how can I get stakeholder buy-in to trial these new technologies?
Try to show successes. Try to pick an example that's actually going to prove something positive, and therefore you have to believe that there is something positive to prove, because otherwise you wouldn't be doing it. There's no point in using technology for the sake of it. You've got to be out there trying to prove something, and start small, grow by successes, but then know that you're going to have to scale out pretty quickly.
So this is, I guess, a follow-on question to that, but it's saying, how do organizations invest in new tech and innovation when the pressure on organizations to spend is to replace existing tech legacy?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we really, really understand that. We really feel that pain. And sometimes we just have to have that conversation that, how long are you going to carry on spending when all you're doing is running to stand still? And the cost of replacement is just piecemeal, and people will worry too much about things like feature parity when they're actually not addressing the actual goals of the system as a whole, or representing the citizen. They've lost sight of the fact that what it is that's supposed to be doing. So I think that it's not necessarily an either or. I think you've got to do both, but it's really, because that's just the reality of it. And, people will say, well, I haven't got that extra money to spend. Well, the problem is that, if that's the only answer that you have, you'll only ever have a constant problem that you're never solving. So something's got to change.
Yeah, it's finding new ways to look at it. Okay, thank you. So you've answered that one. And then, okay, so I understand the best practice examples that you've shared, but how do they relate to my current role?
Well, I think that's the hard part for any of this stuff, that we really have to find a way to make this stuff relevant to people on an everyday basis. No one is unimportant enough or unempowered enough to not make a difference with this, and it has to start everywhere. The grass has to grow everywhere.
Thank you. And I have a final question. You can relax. I appreciate the Estonia example, but they didn't have all of this legacy tech to deal with. Again, that's something, someone else has touched on, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that we kind of touched on that in the talk. Maybe that sort of came before, but they didn't. It's a different problem, but they'd had their own version of legacy, a lot, and the time pressure for them to get something going was immense. So like we're suggesting here for climate change, there is an imperative here. It's not just a commercial imperative, it's a societal imperative. So, we've got our own challenges, so we need to stick to the principles. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Dave and Varsha. Really appreciate your time this afternoon. And thank you also to our attendees for joining. Just to reiterate, we'll be sharing a recording of this in the following days and weeks. Please do visit thoughtworks.com if you'd like to find out a little bit more about us. We'd welcome a further conversation with you all. But with that, please enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.